breaking news. It is the case that Iran has attacked the United States back and a military base in Qatar and also in Iraq. So it is the case that this is going to extend into probably a long-term conflict with Iran. The idea that Trump supporters had, and I debated some yesterday, who had this idea that Iran was not going to respond, right? They literally thought the United States could do this and that Iran was not going to respond at all. And one question I had to ask them was, if this same thing was done specifically by either Russia or Iran within the United States, if they bombed nuclear enrichment facilities operated by the government, we would clearly see that as an act of war and we would respond and that would be a war, right? So clearly, given that that's the same thing with Iran, we would expect to see some type of conflict like that. And we've also seen with Donald Trump on Truth Social saying that if Iran does retaliate, that he's going to retaliate even harder, way harder than like what you would have expected prior. You know, that's obviously Trump language and whatnot, but this just essentially means that since Iran has responded, that this will likely be a long-term conflict. And it's likely that this conflict will go more global than it has, because it is the case that there are trade paths controlled specifically by Iran, right, that they can shut off that will disrupt the global economy's oil supply. So Iran could potentially cut off the Strait of it's Hormuz. I'm actually not quite sure how to pronounce it, which is a vital trade route for 1/5 of the world's oil supply. That is going to have disastrous impacts on our economy if that is shut off, especially to the rest of the global economy. Think about the effect that it's going to have in terms of our grocery stores. Think about the effect that's going to have in terms of, you know, basic commodities that you buy. Everything relies on energy in order to be able to be produced. It's an aspect of its cost of production. So it will cause an increase in the price. We will see gas increase by multiple dollars. And one interesting thing with that is that when the economy becomes bad, will people associate it with the president? That is actually like one thing that we saw under the Biden-Harris administration happen, that when it is the case that the economy seemingly was bad, even if it had no relation specifically to the president Biden, right, and of itself, like Biden was still blamed. So one, this could be the case that Democrats start gaining massive levels of support because it is the case that people are disenfranchised economically, in terms of their beliefs on like our foreign policy. I mean, this was a huge belief that MAGA supporters held to. And I would debate people all the time where they would say no new wars. And that was a constant talking point of, oh, it's going to be peaceful for us. We're not going to go to World War III with Donald Trump as president. Where's that crowd now? I think that crowd is probably watching these videos. A huge portion of them are probably agreeing with us. And a huge portion of them probably feel like they have to stay in the beliefs that they've already held to. And I just want to urge people, anyone who's in that particular position, don't do that. This should be an eye-opening wake-up moment for you. It should be a time where you're like, he's violated almost every one of his fundamental tenets that he said that he was running on in the very first place, alongside of the fact that he's gone against everything this country stands for, right? In terms of a fundamental sense. If we look at our rule of law, our democratic processes and values, our court system, if we look at our Constitution, Donald Trump's undermined all of these things. Called for the termination of the Constitution. He called for people to be put in prison for a year for burning the American flag, which is protected by the First Amendment, according to the Supreme Court. This guy is a fundamental threat to our democratic processes and our courts by denying the 60-plus courts that indicated no sufficient evidence to overturn the 2020 election, as his basis is for him calling for the termination of the Constitution, by the way. But that in itself goes against our democratic processes, against our rule of law, because he's been held civilly liable of sexually abusing a woman, convicted in a criminal court for 34 felonies, and yet he doesn't actually acknowledge those. So he undermines the rule of law as it relates to himself. So one thing that's really concerning is the fact that Donald Trump knew that there would likely be a response from Iran, and he still decided to engage in this. After even putting us in this situation in the very first place, he pulled us out of the nuclear peace agreement, and that is the reason why we're in this position in the first place, where he says that we need to limit them from getting quote-unquote weapons of mass destruction. I also think it's incredibly ironic that Trump supporters, right, you know, oftentimes when he was running originally, like they were in support of the fact that, you know, he's against the Iraq war, he's incredibly anti-war, but then he said that they lied about weapons of mass destruction, and now they're believing based on weapons of mass destruction, we should go into the Middle East. That would be incredibly hypocritical. So I actually don't know where MAGA is going to end up going with this and how they're going to fully respond to Donald Trump. And I mean, some of them I do think are just reinforcing into the cult. So there was this one person, actually, I think I used his picture in some of the thumbnails, like on some of my videos. It's kind of funny because he wears like a MAGA hat and he smiles everywhere he goes. And it's like really cringe. His name's like Never Woke or something. And he originally showed like disagreement with Donald Trump in terms of how he, conducted himself in bombing Iran. But then after getting a bunch of messages from MAGA, decides to literally shift back and decides to then be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have ever called out Trump in the very first place. He just posted that today. I saw that and I was crying and laughing so much. Like, that's so ridiculous that like literally like you were just watching someone who just like is trying so hard to break out of a cult and just genuinely couldn't do it. You got to support him no matter fucking what. It's disastrous for our system, which will affect the world's oil supply. Again, 20% of the world's oil supply. So to sort of put it in perspective for people, I would just say just think about like the entirety of the energy, or almost the entirety of the energy around the world. 1/5 of that supply contracting from being sent around the entire world, what that would do to prices. Because in order for us to be able to reach the same type of supply constraints, in order for it to be at the same price, given the demand that we have, we would need an increase in supply by 20% of the global oil supply back up to get to that point, which there's practically no one that can meet that anytime soon. So this is going to rival things such as the oil embargo that existed in the past that led to massive oil prices and stagflation. And my big concern when it comes to this is we could possibly see this. Stagflation. We could possibly see, this could be the reason why we go through stagflation again. And if you don't know what stagflation is, it's essentially where we're going to have rising unemployment, decreasing GDP, alongside of the fact that you see rising inflation. Because typically when you see employment going down, unemployment going up, and GDP contracting, that's corresponded by a decrease in aggregate demand, which would put downward pressure on prices. But if you're still seeing a price increase while you have those types of issues, that's a really bad sign. Those are the worst possible indicators that you can have for an economy. The worst possible indicators. And that's what's really scary, is that we could possibly go through stagflation because Donald Trump is causing conflict around the world and putting U.S. military lives at risk, putting American citizens' lives at risk. It's disgraceful. It's disgusting. And I don't think any Trump supporter should be standing by this. I think this is a real wake-up moment. This is a real wake-up moment.